Let's go back to when Charles Kennedy was elected at the age of 23. Let's not forget he was elected as an SDP member, and really it's thanks to his backing of the merger between the SDP and the Lib Dems that it became the party that it was.
Yes, I think there's a lot of truth in that statement, because had Charles Kennedy and Robert McLennan decided to go with Dr. David Owen, as he then was, then I think the whole question of merger would have failed. But of course there's no doubt that the merger was in the interests of all of us, that's to say all of us in both parties, and it was a pity that as a result of it some of the SDP peeled off. But as you said a moment or two ago, or as Jerry Jones said a moment or two ago, remember this is the man who obtained the best result for a third party in 50 years with 62 MPs. A quite remarkable achievement.
A remarkable achievement. Many put that down to his anti-Iraq war stance. Let's go back to that speech that it made, because it's become iconic, hasn't it? The words that he spoke were very wise, they were principled, and they were courageous, because he was going against not just the government, but the government's main opposition. And that really was a very brave thing to do, wasn't it?
Extremely brave. And I guess from time to time there may have been some moments of doubt, but he never showed it. And of course the point is that there wasn't just a courageous decision in saying we're against this war, it was a courageous decision to go on saying it in the House of Commons, because for a period of about 6 months Charles Kennedy was subject to some of the most terrible insults. He was called a quisling, he was told that he was an appeaser, you know, that criticism going back to the 1930s, but he never flinched once. He decided that it was a question of principle, and whatever happened, he and the party were going to stick to that principle.
Going back to when Charles Kennedy resigned as party leader and spoke very publicly about the problem that he'd had with drink, do you think that the party that he dedicated his life to actually treated him unfairly? We saw quite a number of Lib Dem MPs really stick the knife in very publicly.
Well, with the benefit of hindsight, you can always look back and say we might have done things differently. But I think he'd reached a point at which he realised himself that he simply couldn't go on the way he was going. And that in itself, you know, took a great deal of courage. We've all got frailties, you know, and Charles Kennedy had to wrestle with some pretty serious demons. And it's come as a great shock to everyone, of course, that eventually much too soon he's died, but he will never be forgotten. He will be remembered as the leader of the Liberal Democrats who obtained that remarkable result, and as all these tributes we've been hearing throughout the day, a man who retained his humanity, a man who was capable of talking to everyone, discussing with George W. Bush. I was in his presence when he did that about the Iraq war, and yet being able to talk to the public in a way which helped them to understand some quite complicated political issues.
Politics was, of course, his life. As we've said, he was an MP from the age of 23 and died tragically young at the age of 55. I don't know if you spoke to him. I imagine you did after he lost his seat in May. How was he? What did he say to you about it?
Well, I didn't have the chance to do so for various reasons, and I think he was rather keeping his head down, although I know that he, for example, had lunch last week with Robert McLennan, who was the other SDP Member of Parliament who was in favour of coalition. And Robert McLennan, a broadcast earlier today, said that Charles Kennedy seemed to be in good form, was reconciled, as it were, to the fact he lost his seat, and was being very philosophical. So in all of those circumstances, given to the problems in relation to his family, the death of his father on the eve of the election campaign, the fact that his father and mother at one stage were both in hospital, he had a pretty difficult time. And of course his family, those who are left, are having a difficult time when you add up all of these most tragic occurrences.
What's his political legacy, do you think?
Iraq, I think Iraq was his finest hour. I don't think there's any doubt about that. It was a difficult decision to take, as we've discussed already, and it was a decision which has rightly been pointed out was against the whole tide of opinion, at least in the House of Commons. But remember this, it was a decision which was with the tide of opinion, in the country. Nearly 1 million people marched through London on that Sunday saying, this war, not in, I think it was a Saturday now I remember, not in my name. And there were similar marches up and down the length and breadth of the country. Charles Kennedy was responsible for the mobilization of that great army of people opposed to the Iraq war by his example. And if you're looking for a legacy, you can't think of anything better than that.
Now, we've heard a lot from politicians about how he came across politically, how he spoke human, that's one way I heard him being described, and how he connected with ordinary people. But as a friend, as someone that you knew and I'm sure shared a lot of time with, how will you remember him?
I remember him as being warm, friendly, generous, gregarious. He liked a good gossip, but then most politicians do. And I remember when I first met him, it was before he was 20, he was only 22. And he was just finishing a degree at Glasgow University. And I met him one evening for the first time. And I remember being bowled over, really, by this quite remarkable young man, self-confident, but not in any aggressive kind of way. And clearly a man of quite enormous talents, which, of course, he demonstrated in debating in the Glasgow University, and also which he demonstrated in the House of Commons. Of that there is no doubt. This was, the word unique is often misused in circumstances of this kind, but let me put it this way. There have been and there will be very few people of the same quality and standard of Charles Kennedy, members of Parliament.